Redbird Speed here. I want to talk a little bit today about the difference between brake offset and the B dimension on the spec sheet. I'm going to kind of talk about how those are not the same thing and what you need to be aware of. So the B dimension on the spec sheet, that is going to be from the outside of the axle face to the stop here. So I'll show you on the spec sheet here what we're looking at here. Outside of axle face to the bearing stop. So what we got going on here, so if you were to slide this axle and this housing in, if you're familiar with this setup, you'll know that that bearing sticks out of that housing end right here by about 1/8 of an inch. And also that inner race of that bearing sticks out about 1/8 of an inch. So when you slide this axle in there with a Big 4 New Style Torino end, your axle stick out is going to be about 2.5 inches right here. On this axle, if you measure from the outside of the axle face to the bearing stop with no bearing on the axle, in this scenario with this bearing and this housing end, that dimension is 2.25 inches. So the brake offset is not the same as the B dimension on the spec sheet. So if we're asking you to, you got something custom going on, hey, pull that bearing off, measure that up, we want to make sure your brakes line up. That's because ultimately, outside of axle face to bearing stop here, when you slide that in, once you get your bearing on, you slide it in the housing, we want to make sure your brakes are going to line up the way they did the first time. So new construction, doing something new, Torino ends, common stuff, you don't need to worry about all this. Measuring up axles, I just want to run through all the specs, explain why they're important, what's going on here. So definitely measure that up if needed. If we're doing something new, don't need to worry about this. But outside of axle face to bearing stop, no bearing on the axle, that's going to be the B dimension on the spec sheet. Brake offset is a different dimension. Also, I will add that this one-piece ball bearing has a different spec than a two-piece tapered roller bearing, because outside of axle face to bearing stop on this axle is 2.25 inches. Let's say we were running a Timken set 20 bearing, that'd be 2 7/16. So the bearing specs are different between ball bearings and tapered bearings. The ID of the bearing is also different, so these are not interchangeable. So if you have a street car with a ball bearing and you decide, hey, I want to autocross this, or I'm going to be putting this thing to its paces, really putting a lot of side load, I need a stronger bearing, it's going to require new axles to make that switch over to a set 20 style taper bearing. So if you have any questions on this, give us a call, 260-301-2424. You can check out our tech page. You can get us on redbirdspeed.com. We're available on all the social media networks. Be sure to give us a like and subscribe. We appreciate your support. We'll get on to the next subject. Thanks a lot. Have a good one.